Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're playing Gruul Slivers for Net Benefits, the series where we explore the benefits of net decking in Pauper. You guys are all probably most familiar with the Selesnya flavored slivers list that often puts up 5-0 results through Pauper leagues. That's why I almost missed this sweet Gruul Slivers list that Frucile put up a 5-0 result with in a Pauper league on Magic Online in the same week that they 5-0'd with Selesnya slivers. Before I get into Gruul Slivers by Frucile, I just want to let you know that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. All right, let's break down Gruul Slivers. We're going to start by breaking down one of the things that makes Pauper Slivers so powerful. That is the 8 lords that they have access to. First is Predatory Sliver, which costs 1 and a green for a 1/1 that gives sliver creatures you control +1/+1 for good. That's what lords do. They just make all the slivers bigger. Well, Predatory Sliver doesn't actually make all of the slivers bigger. It doesn't make your opponent's slivers bigger. That's what makes Muscle Sliver different than Predatory Sliver. It costs 1 and a green for a 1/1, and all sliver creatures, including the ones your opponents control, get +1/+1. While the rest of the slivers in our deck aren't the traditional lords that just give your creatures +1/+1, they do give the rest of the slivers on the battlefield really useful abilities. That's why Frucile's choice to go red over white is really interesting, because they must have seen something very useful that you could do with the red sliver lords abilities that the white sliver lords could not do. The first of those red sliver lords is Heart Sliver. It costs 1 and a red for a 1/1 that gives all sliver creatures haste. Winning out of nowhere is super powerful in Pauper. Opponents have to make a lot of choices about what to do each turn as it is, but knowing that you could just have multiple lethal threats in your hand to deploy and attack all in the same turn is just straight up mind-numbing. Next, we have a couple copies of Hunter Sliver, which costs 1 and a red to give all sliver creatures Provoke. Provoke is a really interesting ability, and if you've been watching the channel for some time, you know that Deathblade Elite does a great job of turning into an abyss using Provoke and First Strike. Provoke means whenever a sliver attacks, its controller may have target creature defending player controls untap and block it if able. I mentioned Provoke and First Strike, which is probably why we have the full 4 copies of Striking Sliver, which costs 1 red mana for a 1/1 that gives all sliver creatures you control First Strike. Finally, we have some slivers that you'd expect to see in other slivers lists, but only because they can still be cast in the green-white shell. We start that package off with Metallic Sliver. Metallic Sliver is essentially just a canvas to paint on for all of your interesting sliver lords. It doesn't have any abilities, it just costs 1 generic mana for a 1/1 sliver. Our last sliver helps cut your opponent's life total in half in terms of sliver attacks, but it doesn't give your sliver creatures +1/+1. It's Virulent Sliver. It costs 1 green for a 1/1 that give all sliver creatures poisonous 1. What poisonous means is whenever a sliver deals combat damage to a player, that player gets a poison counter. A player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game, just like Infect. Something that really helped slivers out in recent years was the downshift of our next spell, which is how we're going to get the majority of our card advantage. It's Lead the Stampede. It costs 2 and a green for a sorcery, and it lets you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal any number of creature cards from among them and put the revealed cards into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. If your opponent has been trying to trade 1-for-1 with your slivers, or worse, if they've gotten 2-for-1 with your slivers and then you resolve a Lead the Stampede and even just draw 2 or 3, it's absolutely backbreaking. I cannot wait to play with this spell. The rest of our spells aren't slivers. In fact, they're non-creature spells, but they go along with dealing a lot of damage to your opponent's face, which really helps out our aggressive plan. That package starts off with Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning costs 1 red mana for a sorcery and deals 3 damage to any target. Then that player or that permanent's controller may pay red. If that player does, they may copy the spell and choose new targets for the copy. You've got to make sure your opponent can't copy your Chain Lightning. That's kind of a disaster scenario unless they're dead on board anyway. However, we are running a spell without the downside of Chain Lightning in Lightning Bolt, which I think is just a strictly better Chain Lightning. It costs 1 red mana for an instant that deals 3 damage to any target. Our last non-creature spell that's helping us be aggressive is Mutagenic Growth. It costs 1 green for Phyrexian mana, and hey, we can actually pay for that in this deck, unlike most other Mutagenic Growth decks that are paying 2 life for it. It gives target creature +2/+2 until until end of turn at instant speed. Our last main deck non-land card is Electrickery, which costs 1 red mana to deal 1 damage to target creature you don't control at instant speed, which would be very bad. But Electrickery has the Overload ability, which says you may cast a spell for its overload cost of 1 and a red. If you do, change its text by replacing all instances of target with each. There are a lot of X1 decks out there that just completely fold to the first Electrickery, especially if you have a ton of huge slivers attacking on the back end, so I'm really glad to have one of these here to break those board stalls. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base. We only have 21 lands, and that's probably why we're running 2 Gruul Turfs, your green and red Karus. We're cheating on our mana a little bit, and we want to hit 3 mana consistently enough to lead the Stampede on time. We're running 2 copies of Colony Garden to get a token down so that our opponent's first Chainer's Edict doesn't eat our first Lord. We have 4 copies of Rugged Highlands for gaining us a little bit of life and fixing our mana. We have 2 copies of Teetering Peaks, which is a really cool kind of pump spell land. It enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and we have 1 Tranquil Thicket, which we're going to use if we're flooding out. We can pay a green, discard it from our hand, and draw a new card off of the top of our deck. All right, let's have a look at this sideboard. We have 2 more copies of Electrickery if our opponent is on all X1s. We have 1 copy of Gorilla Shaman for blowing up all of Affinity's lands. We have 2 copies of the very powerful Ancient Grudge that is going to blow up a ton of artifacts. We have 1 copy of Flaring Pain against those Prismatic Strands or Moment's Peace decks. We have a Relic of Progenitus for nuking our opponent's graveyards. Speaking of Prismatic Strands or Moment's Peace, we have 2 copies of Tangle, our own Fog if our opponent is going all in on a single attack. We have 3 copies of Pyroblast to fight those blue decks, and we have 3 copies of Feed the Clan for gaining a ton of life against Stompy and Burn. And there you have it, Gruul Slivers by Frucile. We're going to take this deck into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince. We're there every Monday night playing competitive Pauper decks at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Monday night.